This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. To protect your internet, click the link in the description to get an 83% discount and 3 months free. Yes, it is a shame to see several of my favorite series that Disney Channel has ever made all coming to an end relatively close to each other. But I will count my blessings in that I'm hard-pressed to find series that I've enjoyed this much. I haven't had a chance to talk about my feelings on Amphibia or Owl House yet, but for the most part it's been because I haven't had anything revolutionary to say that isn't part of general consensus. They're both really good and I enjoy them a lot. Which is why I'm framing what thoughts I do have in the very clickbaity format of a hot takes list, which are really more lukewarm topics that tend to pop up a lot when talking about these shows, and in some cases being more about how we talk about these shows. But first, I need to thank my sponsor, Surfshark VPN. As much as we are frustrated with the internet on an hourly basis, fact is much of us still need it at some point to live. Or at least to check when the final season of Owl House will premiere. So to make the internet a little less frustrating and to lessen the fear of being tracked or having our personal information being leaked, Surfshark VPN protects your internet connection and online privacy by masking your identity and allowing you to access data safely by way of military-grade encryption and also blocking pop-ups and malicious websites. It doesn't slow down your internet connection, you can use it on unlimited devices, and you can connect to international servers to bypass geo-blocked content, all with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So to make your internet experience a little bit more bearable, click the link in the description or the QR code to get an amazing 83% discount and 3 months free. I wish Owl House and Amphibia weren't pitted against each other as often as they are, since most fans, it seems, tend to genuinely enjoy both, and most versus fight between the two are just expressions of people's mild preferences that don't even seem to be by significant margins. Still, I do get the tendency to compare them because of their broad similar premises and erring at the same time, and if the internet has revealed anything, it's the human lizard brain's compulsion to compare things to other familiar things. So, to get it out of my system, Amphibia and Owl House are both Disney Channel shows premiering in the late 2010s about teenage girls who have problems with their family and school life, get sucked into a alternate dimension fantasy world, which is home to, amongst other sentient species, giant carnivorous monsters. The girls get taken in by a soon-to-be beloved surrogate family, helmed by a hilariously sassy parental figure, and Season 1 is largely episodic and comedically toned, as they fortify bonds with many of the locals, and the season ends with a dangerous and emotional confrontation, settling into the darker tone of Season 2. Both feature villains that prolong their life through unnatural means, and at Season 2's end, the two end up back home after defeating one enemy/conflict, but then another has revealed themselves and end up leaving several loved ones behind and likely in peril. And both being spiritual descendants of our beloved Gravity Falls, both in their darkly comedic apocalyptic tones and the people behind the scenes. Both have their own aesthetic twist on the expected medieval fantasy isekai. Amphibia is probably a bit closer to a traditional Lord of the Rings Zelda-style world, but with the dominant sentient species being amphibians. Owl House goes more for the magic school, but one that is significantly more macabre and hellscapey. And while both employ a lot of surprise dark humor, Amphibia sucks you in with an almost idyllic pastoral landscape which makes the sudden contrast of danger and darkness surprising. It also gets a lot of mileage out of the overly dramatic close-up.
Have you killed a man, Hop Pop?
Whereas Owl House almost always has something visually unexpected and even grotesque in the scene, which often hilariously contrasts with the characters being extremely pleasant, upbeat, and nonchalant about it. But one of the most prominent divides between the two shows is the themes and arcs of their protagonists. As a contemporary teenager used to all of the modern conveniences and usually avoids hard work and responsibility, and also apparently hates frogs, the absolute worst place for Anne to end up in is a rustic pre-industrial farm town run by frogs. In the episodic occurrences in Season 1, Anne makes her usual kind of self-centered choices that she made back home, only now the fallout isn't just disappointing her parents. Being in a world that she doesn't know anything about, now there are potentially lethal consequences. So she starts to have to actually pay attention and address some of her self-destructive tendencies, lest she and everyone around her die. And yes, that is an incredibly effective behavioral corrective regimen. Anne's character is someone who tends to lazily muss around and half-heartedly follows other people because she doesn't know who she is or what she wants. Anne starts the series at her lowest, but gradually improves herself and gains more secure sense of self as she goes. In Owl House, Luce lands in the fantasy world she thought she always wanted to be in, and runs enthusiastically into becoming the witch she always dreamed of being. So she starts out her series positively euphoric, and very sure about what she wants, but bit by bit as she stays in the Boiling Isles, she sees how the world isn't like her fantasy. And now what she wants and her sense of self becomes less and less sure. And this theme of breaking through artificial narratives or things that people want to be true is reflected in nearly all of the other characters. King calling himself the King of Demons. Hunter being told that he has a special destiny as long as he does what he's told. Amity being told she has a special destiny as long as she does what she's told. Willow being told she couldn't be friends with Amity because she was weak, which mentally prompted her to be weak. Even the detrimental narratives we tell ourselves, like Gus. And especially in a dark reflection of Luce, Bellows still wants to be known as the savior of humanity against the evils of witches. Despite the fact that he has lived in this world for literally centuries, you'd think that over time he would have gotten to know any of the populace and learned that witches were not inherently evil, but he chose to believe what he wanted to believe for the sake of his own goals. In a similar vein, some have pointed out how the Collector is a dark reflection of King, as a dangerous, all-powerful child, but one who hasn't made any connections or care about how his actions affect people. And to wrap up this mini-review, Owl House's story is a bit more ambitious and I like slightly more of the characters. Amphibia is better structured, better paced, especially when it comes to transitioning from the comedic to the grander narrative. But they're both great! I don't have to choose. I like the Planters more than I like Sasha and Marcy, which is basically a roundabout way of saying that I have enjoyed Amphibia more when it's a comedy rather than when it's trying to be a Dimension Invasion war story. Hop Pop especially has had a very interesting relationship evolving over time with Anne. As the oldest, he's the most set in his ways, and the one most suspicious of Anne. The two take the longest to come around to each other, so when the two actually start hitting it off and even sharing older responsibilities with each other, and then of course when he starts calling her his adopted granddaughter, it is, my heart breaks. Which of course makes the moment where Anne finds out that he's been lying to her all the more devastating. Anne and Sprig are adorable BFFs together, and Polly is just hilarious. This isn't to say that I don't like Sasha and Marcy. Bringing over two other humans into Amphibia is part of what makes the series feel unique. Particularly, Sasha adds an interesting challenge to Anne, because like her, where Sasha happened to land in Amphibia had a significant effect on her behavior. Anne's surroundings compelled her to fight against a lot of her worst tendencies, but for Sasha, they encouraged them. She became even more controlling and manipulative, and now with a dose of violent reinforcement. So when they meet again, they are very different people than they were, both stronger in a sense on opposite sides of a literal life or death conflict, and forces them to see each other in a new light. Basically, Anne improved, Sasha got worse, and Marcy thrived, but her behavior stayed pretty much the same. This bleeds into my next point. Could have lived without the Super Saiyan powers. They were cool, they made for a lot of fun action sequences, just the sudden superpower angle is such a stark ramp up from the slightly more grounded tone the series had, and then forward wasn't even used that often. It's also just part of my existing exasperation with chosen ones and destinies and prophecy tropes. This is not insinuating that I feel like this was poorly handled, or not properly foreshadowed or paid off. And I have to admit that this is some amazing foreshadowing. Maybe this is just because I've done anime before, and in some ways even other anime people might prefer this because it's all the superpowered actions, but without characters breaking into unending monologues every 2 minutes. Maybe this is just superhero burnout. I definitely still think this is one of the best animated finales. I mean, it's not the Rise of TMNT finale, but it's still pretty great. Also, personal headcanon, the portal technically can be opened via that machine that they made, if only by a little bit, which is probably enough for a Wi-Fi signal to pass through, so they can technically still communicate. In the finale, one thing that a lot of people were disappointed to hear was how Sasha and Anne gravitated toward different friend groups when they got into high school, and how many people just could not buy this after all that they went through. But to me, that made perfect sense, because honestly, I saw the bond between the three in middle school something way more akin to a friendship by convenience. They had things in common, but basically hung out with each other because they didn't have anyone else. Now, this is not to say that friendships out of convenience can't be real friendships, or that the three don't care about each other, but we can see back then that their personalities were kind of out of sync, they weren't really listening to each other, and in various ways they were holding each other back. Then the three go into Amphibia. That has, in a way, made their connection even stronger, if only just by the nature that they are the only humans in this dimension, and the only thing that the other finds remotely familiar, so even when they're fighting, they are still drawn to each other. And obviously, after everything they've gone through, there is definitely a connection that only the three will have with each other and will last forever, but that doesn't mean that after the apocalypse, that their personalities are suddenly in sync with each other. They are all still very different people. Who you are during a time of crisis is not necessarily the same kind of person you are as a civilian. Anne and Sasha were great together when they had a common goal, but once that was gone, did they have anything in common anymore? But it's also fair that just because Sasha and Marcy have apologized and have learned, doesn't mean that the rifts in their friendship are instantly healed. And after all, the entire mantra of the finale is accepting that things change. Even after the apocalypse, life goes on and the girls still change. That doesn't mean that they're not friends. They're just not school buddies. Amity's turnaround is fine, actually. Another of the more frequent criticisms of Season 1 is that it felt that Amity went from bully to crush too quickly. Admit that I probably could have used an extra episode or two, particularly in regarding her and Willow's relationship before the Mind episode, but broadly, I think it's handled perfectly fine, and largely because Amity was never really that bad. She was kind of snooty and catty and felt superior to others, but the only one she was ever really rude to was Willow, a person she has a complicated history with. I can see how in some contexts that might be viewed as worse. But certainly in the pantheon of school bullies, she's not a literal attempted murdering junior Nazi, and she'd need to walk several miles to even be a Paris Geller. In fact, her anger at Luce is more about Luce being a rule breaker. At this point, Amity has distorted her life for the sake of doing what others want her to do and for following an arbitrary set of social rules. She cannot stand that someone like Luce could potentially get ahead by cheating. She has to reassure herself that her way of doing things is the only proper way of doing things, or else why is she doing it this way? I'll also note that some people have stated that Season 1 was the only time Amity was allowed to have her own development, and Season 2 has only been about her and Luce's relationship. Slight disagreement. There is a whole thing in Season 2 about her complicated relationship with her parents, which she is gradually starting to break. Not entirely valid now, but at one point my biggest Owl House hot take was not liking Hunter, or at least thinking the fandom made too big of a deal out of him, and he was an obvious Zuko clone. Well, I was half right, but ultimately I ended up really liking what they did with him, especially him growing close to Willow and Gus. And a last but minor point, people abuse the word filler too much, attributing it to literally any episode that doesn't progress the story. Both of these series were designed to be partially episodic. That doesn't mean that there isn't still character development or world building in those episodes, to say nothing of just enjoyable comedy. I admit, I don't care for many of the army building episodes in Amphibia 3B, but I would not call them filler. I know a lot of people, including me, are very disappointed at Owl House's ending being kneecapped for really stupid reasons, likely, especially given other shows whose premature cancellation had not great effects on the nature of their ending. Still, no one knows until it actually airs, but Dana Terrence especially has encouraged fans to not be so doom and gloom about this decision, because they still intend to make it a great finale, and even came up with some ideas that they wouldn't have come up with before this change. Besides, so many have whinged about the filler of Season 1 and the filler of Amphibia Season 3. You'd think that here they'd be happy that there'd finally be no filler. Anyway, that's all my prominent thoughts for the moment. I really could have gone further into how much I love various characters from both shows, but right now my eloquence can't really extend past, yes, indeed, I love them. I love all of them, very much so. In the meantime, Animaniacs, tell me what you've enjoyed the most about Owl House and Amphibia, and why Disney is so good at making sassy elderly characters.